And that is where we start tonight with Dr. Warren Farrell, author of The Boy Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. Dr. Farrell, thank you very much for being here tonight.
It's a pleasure.
It's great to have you here. I mean, obviously, there's the big picture of what's going on with men and boys in America. Then there is this subset, very tiny subset, very violent subset, and you see some common threads among these young men, and we're still waiting to learn more about the killers over the past couple of days in El Paso and Dayton. But what is the dad deficit, and how do you see it come into play here through your research and study?
What I found is that in the prison population, in the ISIS population, in the mass shooter population, they all have in common a very high percentage, about 90%, dad-deprived boys. And what happens when boys are dad-deprived is they don't have a male role model to channel their testosterone constructively. And so you don't, and the male role model tends, in addition to being just a male role model, dads tend to be much tougher on boundary enforcement, and the boundary enforcement creates postponed gratification, which leads the boys to being able to be successful at school or successful in sports, to feel more proud of themselves, not ashamed of themselves, not withdrawing, not feeling like an outsider. They get praise from teachers, they get praise from women and male peers, and they get praise at home. And those boys remain involved in the process. They're also much more likely to learn how to be empathetic because they do roughhousing with dad. And then the roughhousing dad says, you put your elbow in your sister's face, there'll be no more roughhousing. So the boy learns to think of his sister rather than thinking just of himself. And he learns the difference between being assertive and aggressive. All these things, empathy and assertiveness, create friendships that allow him to be involved and engaged and feel like and his ability to accomplish things allows him to feel a sense of purpose. So boys with dads involved, the more the father is involved, the more that boy is likely to discover himself and be successful in whatever he discovers.
And I just want to point out again that there are plenty of families who, grow up with parents in two different houses who do fine. And we are not making an overgeneralization about that. What we're doing is looking at this subset and trying to figure out where the synapses, break down. That's not a scientific term in my way, just sort of a way of looking at it. But we showed that chart in the beginning, all those men who are mass killers, only one woman among them since 1966. These young girls, in many cases, grew up in the same circumstances. Dad has left. They've got access to the same kind of violent video games. They have, access in some cases to guns, but they don't do it. Why?
Because first of all, the girls are more likely to be brought up by a role model of a female mom. Secondly, as they learn they learn also don't have as much postponed gratification, but girls without postponed gratification that don't do as well, boys are still interested in them. That's not the primary way that boys choose them. They're more likely to have a mom to empathize with them and work with them, and so they don't have as much tendency toward violence. The testosterone doesn't channel itself into negative and purposeless outcomes as often. However, on average, the children that do best by far and away tend to have a checks and balance parenting of the dad's propensity to do that boundary enforcement and the mom's propensity to do more nurturance. And when those two come together, those children on average do significantly better.
Yeah, you pointed out in one of the talks that you gave a young man whose last post before he shot and killed someone was, "I wish I had a dad." Yes. And then there are these other examples from these studies. Well, first, this is from Elliot Rogers' manifesto, another young shooter. He said, "After I picked up the handgun, I brought it back to my room and felt a new sense of power. I was now armed. Who's the alpha male now?" And you can see the expletive at the end of that.
And of course, he's exactly the opposite of the alpha male. What he's done is he came from a divorced home. There was a great deal of conflict, and when boys don't know how to succeed and have purpose, and he was very sensitive, and he felt that, gee, mom says that the girls like sensitive guys, but then he sees the girls going out with the football players and the not so sensitive guys, and he becomes angry and hurt and feels rejected. And so boys who hurt us.
You think there should be, we've heard so much about empowering girls and women over the last many years. And in fact, you started your career working on women's studies and the women's movement back in the 60s and 70s. But you say it is time now for a White House Council on men and boys. Why?
Because boys have been having increasing numbers of problems. Boys are much more likely to commit suicide now than girls are, 4 to 6 times as likely in the late teens and early 20s. Their life expectancy is going down. That's amazing that any sex's life expectancy is going down. Girls' life expectancy is not going down. Their sperm counts are going down by 50%. Their IQs are going down. They're much more likely to feel that anger that comes without having jobs. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell pointed out there's 2 crises that are occurring in the future. One is the cyber warfare, the second is the boy crisis. Yeah. And so if we're not preparing our schools with male teachers, with communication systems, teaching girls and boys in elementary school to communicate with each other rather than bully each other, teaching their parents to communicate with each other so that there aren't the divorces that lead to the absence of fathers.
Very interesting. We want to have you back. Dr. Warren Farrell, thank you so much, sir. Very interesting research and work that you've been doing. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you for caring.
You bet.